What is going on, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls? We are back with another Legends of Runeterra video for you all, and we've got a very exciting balance patch that we're going to go over really quick here. We just got Runeterra patch 1.2, which brings us quite a few nerfs and buffs to various different things. Some things we definitely were not expecting, but other things that definitely make sense. So let's go ahead and just jump right in, and we'll just talk about a few of the cards that we've got going on here. So the first big one is the first really big one is we have a Karma nerf. Let's just skip over the Vlad really quick and talk about one of the most played and most polarizing champions in the game that we have currently, which is Karma. She has been nerfed to 6 cost, and this is pretty huge. I mean, pretty much the best ladder deck, especially when you climb higher and higher in tiers, is the Karma Lux control deck. And that deck was hit pretty hard with this patch. That deck relies pretty heavily on 3 and 4 drops. As well as Remembrance to stabilize in the early to mid game with the Badger Bear, the Grizzled Ranger, the Remembrance, and as you'll see later in the patch, both the Grizzled Ranger and the Badger Bear were both hit with a nerf as well. And the Karma going up to 6 cost means that you can't comfortably play a 5-drop champion and a 6-drop champion being Karma and Lux. We have to, again, kind of balance our resources between playing Karma and Lux at the same cost, potentially on the same turns, and balance the mana cost of protecting them with stuff like Deny and Will and all that other stuff to prevent them from dying. And it's going to be even harder to balance getting unyielding on one of them when you have to get both of these on the board. I mean, it doesn't necessarily change the late game portion of the game where potentially you're just dropping Karma on 10, but it definitely warps the ability to be able to play Karma on 10, potentially unyielding it, potentially do some other stuff with that one additional mana. So this is, I think, a well-deserved nerf. Karma has been at the top of the metagame constantly, and I don't think this makes her unplayable by any means. Her effect is insanely strong, and in a lot of decks you're not even playing her until like really late, like 9 going into 10 on 10. So yeah, this is well deserved. I think this is pretty much on the money of what you'd expect for a nerf, and except for maybe potentially like a rework on her. If she still is like really, really top tier and this doesn't really like affect her play rates, even though it should definitely by like some percentage points, they might look to rework her leveled up forms ability, but that's for a later date. We'll see what the data suggests. And then on to Vladimir, we have a pretty interesting rework on his level up ability. Instead of just dealing 1 damage for every other attacking enemy, like dealing 1 damage to all of your attacking enemies and then dealing that damage to the Nexus, it's instead turning into a drain like the Neverglade Collector. So instead of just doing damage, you also heal damage. So if you have 4 other attacking allies, you would deal 4 damage, 1 individual damage to each attacker, and then 4 damage to the Nexus, and then you would heal 4, which I think is a really incredible ability. With the burn nerfs that we'll cover shortly, it definitely gives I was already thinking that Neverglade Collector was going to be definitely a card to look at for these kind of token kind of undying decks where once you drop it, you're kind of you're putting on a ton of pressure on your enemy's Nexus health, and you're also healing a ton, so you're bolstering both of your both of the board states pretty heavily. So I think that this puts Vladimir into definitely a very interesting position, especially since, I mean, you can drop pretty low. He already has a ton of support with the Crimson package. I mean, a lot of the units are pretty overstated because they're dealing damage to each other, and that's the whole point of that type of archetype. So you are most likely going to be surviving pretty... you're not going to be taking, I don't think, that much damage unless you draw really poorly. So I could definitely, unfortunately, see this card going either way. There's potential that the drain actually doesn't really do much. This doesn't really affect any way that the Vladimir deck is played. It's played pretty much essentially the same, so it's kind of very dependent on whether that archetype can survive with the other nerfs that are coming out. Like, does this deck have the strengths to overcome some of the stuff that's still going to exist in the metagame, and does the extra survivability even matter at the end of the day? Like, if you're falling behind on board or your creature, you're still at the end of the day dealing damage to your own board and making it easier for your opponent to trade into your creatures. So is this really... I'm suspicious to say that this card is like insane now. It's like almost identical, except that you're getting a little bit of survivability with the card as well. So we'll see. Yeah, it's just kind of like we have to wait and see if this deck can even survive against other decks on the ladder. And I'm kind of suspicious of whether it will or not, so we'll see. And then we got the Shen Buff, which is pretty interesting. He's got 1 power on both level ups. A 4 mana 3/5 is a ridiculous stat line. I mean, for just like putting like in perspective of like a Thresh, it costs 1 more mana and he has 1 more health. His level up is a little bit more impactful by obviously dragging in a champion, but I mean a 5 mana 3/6 is pretty much what you expect, and you're just trading 1 health for that. You're getting, if you have Shen leveled up, you're actually getting an even cheaper 3/6, which is pretty insane. This stat line is like ridiculous on a 4-drop, so I think this is a very powerful buff for Shen in the Shen archetype, but the Shen archetype is also heavily dependent on other cards. Like, it's heavily dependent on the deck. So can the kind of bright steel, maybe Fiora stuff survive? I mean, maybe with the Demacia nerfs, Fiora maybe finds a better home with the Shen archetype, or there's some other... There's also interesting synergy with one of the other cards that's being buffed, and we'll get to that in a minute, but I think this definitely brings Shen up in his power level, so I would definitely expect see people experimenting with Shen, and potentially there might emerge like a Shen archetype where he's actually like pushing up into tier 2 finally after a very long time being in the shadows. And then we have a Vi nerf, which is well deserved. Vi is, as they say in the little overview here, that she doesn't have, obviously not particularly game warping effects like some champions, but she is definitely overperforming with her raw power. A 5 mana, potentially like 5 or 6 power, depending on how many other cards you've played on curve. With Demacia, it's most likely like a 6 power potentially, and so like a 5 mana 6/5 tough challenger is just obscenely powerful. Even for a champion, it's just obscene, and we've seen how insane over and over in how many decks she just finds homes in. She pretty much anything like Mono Demacia splashes her just because it's an insane 5-drop. It's pretty much the best 5-drop. You could play this in Radiant Guardian or just this, and it's just bonkers powerful. She's been finding homes in decks everywhere. Like, new Ezreal Vi is a thing. We have obviously the Heimer Vi, which was kind of the scourge of the early metagame when the patch first came out. We have obviously Karina Vi. She just has so much potential with that stat line. I think this nerf is super well deserved. I think it's pretty much exactly what you expect from this team in terms of what they nerf. I think it's about in line with what you'd expect, and it's definitely going to affect some play percentages and definitely change the math on some of the stuff, but definitely weaken her by not like a ton, because she's still insane. She could probably trade into 2 things before she goes down, and huge tempo card still, and not unplayable by any means. She'll still see a ton of play. And then interestingly enough, we have a Hecarim buff. I was certainly not expecting this, but he pretty much went from the most OP champion in the beta with his original form to completely unplayable when they nerfed him. He used to be 6 mana 4/6, or was it? Yeah, it was 6 mana 4/6, and I think it was a 6+ ephemeral allies attacking. And the Spectral Riders used to be 3/2s instead of 2/2s. So he was just insanely strong in the beta. You drop him on turn 6, he is essentially a 6 mana, 10 across 3 bodies. It was bonkers. It was so strong. The meta was completely warped by him. And then they obviously dropped him down a health, I think. Bumped up his ephemeral cost, and then nerfed the Spectral Riders by 1 attack. So he became almost instantaneously... people still played it, obviously, because they had the cards crafted, but he became almost unplayable. And that obviously was evidenced by his play rate after that nerf and throughout the release of the patch, and he just has no essential play rate. And so they gave his power a buff, so he's going to be 5 power. So this is pretty relevant because he can't be hit by Reckoning, which is pretty relevant. It makes its way into a lot of the Ashe mid-range decks in tournaments. So he can't be hit by Reckoning. He obviously can't be hit by like Brittle Steel stuff. He'll never be able to be hit by that. And I think this could definitely prove very useful in a mid-range ephemeral Neverglade collector type of stuff, especially since burn aggro is getting nerfed quite a bit in this patch. I think that more mid-range strategies are going to be able to survive some slower stuff. We'll see if they'll be able to survive in case any other type of archetypes pop up that kind of push them out of the meta. But I think this is definitely an interesting buff, and I think it'll prove fairly, it won't be insignificant, I don't think. So we'll just have to wait and see. This was interesting. The Greathorn Companion, I guess it makes sense to, like they said, they're kind of repurposing the power between Grizzled Ranger, Badger Bear, and this. So they're giving the Greathorn Companion kind of a buff. I don't think this is not even close to on the power levels of something like Radiant Guardian, so I don't necessarily think that this will see more play rate. I just think that, maybe the Grizzled Ranger and the Badger Bear will... I'm pretty sure they're still the best 3 and 4 drops for Demacia. I mean, we'll get to that in a sec, but I don't think that the Greathorn Companion will be seeing much more play off that buff. So the Grizzled Ranger is dropping into power 3-1. It's still going to be played. It's still going to be played. It's still so good. Still has so much value. Yeah, it'll still see play. I mean, that's pretty much all you need to say about it. It's going to... I mean, like, maybe the win rates will drop like a little bit since it has a little bit less power, but this is still just so good. So it'll still see play. This is a card that I think could definitely work with a Shen archetype. I mean, now that it has 2 health, it can't just be like Vile Feasted. Like a 4-drop that can be Vile Feasted, I mean, it's just unplayable. It's just straight up unplayable. And now that it has 2 health, it definitely could find a place. And since it generates another random follower in hand, another challenger follower at that too, it could definitely find a way to be in the metagame for sure. I think this card, I mean, they buffed the Lauren Duelist, which gave something challenger. It's another, I think it's a 3-drop 4/2 that gives an ally challenger. I mean, that hasn't really seen play, but this effect is like so much more strong than that. So I think there's definitely potential with this. There's some sort of value Shen archetype that could potentially prop up here. Is it better than Bannerman? We'll see. I don't particularly think it will be. It's definitely going to be less consistent than Bannerman, so yeah. But it definitely, there could be some sort of like tier 2 archetype here with like Shen and maybe some other stuff potentially. So yeah, I think this is a solid buff. They obviously want to see this card be played more, and I mean, this is, I think, about as far as you could go with this kind of buff, with this kind of value generating ability, so... the Loyal Badger Bear is being nerfed to a 3-mana 3/4. Still super strong stat line. 3-mana 3/4 is insane. I can't believe this was printed as is. 3-mana 4/4 was just... everyone knew. I mean, I don't know... They must have known that this was insane. They must have just wanted to put out, like, some really powerful cards with the patch, but... yeah, this is pretty much in line. Yeah, I mean, like, the Badger Bear is problematic on its own, obviously. It says particularly in expeditions where Demacia's general strength is Rost. I mean, yeah. I mean, there must be a lot of, like, people on the balance team and there must be some really, really avid expedition players. But, I mean, this is even, like, problematic potentially in standard. I mean, in constructed. So, yeah, that's a very, I think, deserved nerf. Standalone being nerfed, which is really interesting. This hits a ton of different things. Like, this is crazy. I was definitely not expecting this in terms of nerfs. This hits the Fiora kind of Immortal Fiora archetype. This hits the like Zed Fiora standalone aggro stuff with like potentially like this hits like Solitary Monk standalone strategies. Yeah, this is crazy. I mean, like, I think this is probably about in line with what you'd expect from something like this. I mean, I'm pretty sure Swim is going to be pretty upset by this because he loves these like all in on one creature strategies, and this is going to be, I don't know. This pushes like some of these strategies are just pretty much unplayable now. I feel like this was their whole like waiting until turn 3, dropping a huge standalone single creature like a Zed, and now you can't even do that on turn 3. Yeah, it's just the Zed is completely vulnerable, and the Fiora is also super vulnerable. In the 2 turns before, or the turn that you drop this, you have to delay it even further. You have to play like a 3-drop that you potentially don't even want to play, and then you can't even buff it with like standalone. You can do another combat trick potentially, like a prismatic barrier or something, but that deck is getting hit super hard by this. Obviously, they don't want to encourage this type of gameplay pattern where you're all in on one creature and it just kind of like snowballs from there. So I don't necessarily know if that was like the most problematic card, but obviously they think that it is creating undesirable play patterns, like they said in this description. So yeah, we can just move on. This is definitely not what I was expecting from a burn aggro nerf, but I think it makes a lot of sense. This gets rid of actually a surprising amount of the early game power that the Noxus brings to the burn aggro stuff. This makes sense. So they're seeing a huge boost in win rate against certain archetypes when they played Rearguard on turn 1 and then were able to curve out. So, I mean, this makes sense. There's really no replaceable 1-drop for the Rearguard. You could play like Astute Academic, which is not the same, not even close. And you could play... There's one other 1-drop between the two, PNZ and Noxus, but I'm not sure what it is, but I'm pretty sure it's also not really that great. Oh, it's the discard one. It's the, like, to play me, discard 1, last breath, draw a card, and that's not the same either by any means. So, with this nerf, and let's just scroll down, I don't know why I didn't put this straight up together, the Boom Crew nerf, yeah, we have already seen in tournament aggro decks people shifting towards using the Insightful Investigator, which is the... Let's go ahead and pull it up really quick. Which is this 4-mana 3/3. When you play a 2-cost card, draw 1 fleeting, which kind of gives the burn aggro decks more of an engine later on in the game. You don't really... This is the highest cost thing in besides Decimate in like a burn aggro deck, and obviously like Static, but this gives you more of an engine to find more cards, potentially reestablish a board, and find a way to squeak out a win if you are falling behind on board or start with kind of a dead hand. So between these two nerfs, I could definitely see it being less of a burn deck and more of an aggro deck again. And the difference between burn and aggro is actually pretty significant. Burn is, I mean, this is our first real iteration of a burn deck that we've seen in Legends of Runeterra that has been super successful because we got so many different spells that went over the top of the enemy's minions. And since this is such a combat-oriented game, having those potential resources is really, really, really powerful in a burn deck. We got like Noxian Fervor, I mean, that was pretty much one of the main tools. We got Noxian Fervor, but we just had more access to other things that went over the top. And Boom Crew Rookie being a 1/4 was definitely super problematic because really only one region had an answer to that, which was the Badger Bear. And now the Badger Bear technically wouldn't have even been able to trade with it, but since it is nerfed, I mean, sorry, no, what am I talking about? It would have been able to, it still is able to trade with it. I was thinking about that in some weird backwards way, but the Badger Bear is still... I mean, the Badger Bear got nerfed too, so I don't know what I'm talking about. Just disregard that. So, I think this is a huge nerf. This can pretty much every 1-drop now, except barring some really weird unplayable ones from like Freljord with the 0/3 and some other stuff like the Chompers. Everything can trade with this now. So, this really is going to hit the 1-drop pool super hard for that burn aggro archetype. And then the Boom Crew Rookie, there's so many things that can interact with 3 health as opposed to 4 health. I mean, most 2-drops have at least 2 attack, and then a lot of decks have potentially 1 way to just deal 1 damage or something along those lines. So it's going to be harder for Boom Crew Rookie to get essentially 2 Mystic Shots worth of value out of getting 2 attacks. So I think this is huge, and it was pretty much what everyone expected. People definitely were expecting maybe like it being a 0/4 like it was in the beta, but I think that's definitely less impactful and doesn't bring any board pressure whatsoever. So I think going down to 3 health is probably the healthiest nerf there. And this buff I think is going to be huge. I think this is going to drop the burn aggro percentages a decent amount. I mean, it still will be, I'm not sure if it'll be tier 1 anymore. It might be in like the bottom of tier 1, but it'll definitely be still probably like the top of tier 2. We'll just have to wait and see how the like play rates work out. This is super interesting. This, out of all of the cards that they could have given Freljord some love, this is the one I expected the least. I mean, burn aggro is already taking a huge hit. This card also doesn't get played very often, so giving it 3 power is definitely interesting. The Yeti one though is definitely still a better 3-drop. Healing your Nexus 3, when burn was like at its peak before this patch, obviously it really was not that impactful. 3 really just delays the clock, and I'm remiss to say that I don't think this is, I mean, the difference between 2 and 3 power is huge. It makes it a fearsome blocker. It definitely brings this card into viability in terms of like when you're deck building, but do I think that it's going to make the cut in a lot of lists? No, because Freljord doesn't, I mean, unless Freljord gets another buff like over another patch or something, or some other archetype crops up that can make use of Freljord in this. I just don't think that this is the exact fix for Freljord, really. So, yeah. Freljord, I mean, still has the Plunder Sejuani stuff and the Ash midrange stuff, but that's pretty much all it has. Maybe those decks will find higher win rates now that Demacia has gotten a little bit of a nerf, but I don't know. I just don't. Yeah, this is really like it's weird to me that this was a focus for them. So I don't know, kind of strange. Deep Med, huge nerf. This is huge. This card was hands down the best card in the set. If you played 2 spells in the previous turn, it's a 2-mana draw 2 spells, which is absolutely bonkers. It's just disgusting. So this nerf, well deserved. I think it will be very, very difficult for decks to kind of just spam this now. Like, the difference between playing 2 of these for 4 mana and playing 2 of these for 6 mana is huge. But 6 mana, like, being able to play 2 of these for 6 mana is still really, really strong. I don't think this card will, I don't think it'll affect the play rate of this card because this card is bananas. But I think it's a well-deserved nerf, and it will, you know, it'll definitely change how people have to play their decks, and it's definitely a big hit to Karma archetypes. Karma got really targeted, it seems like, this patch, which is good because she really has dodged she's been on the watch list for a really long time. She's dodged the kind of nerf hammer, I guess. So it's about time that this kind of stuff got hit a little bit. So, I mean, I don't think this will affect Ionia's play rates really that much because Ionia still has just like some of the best cards in the game. Will of Ionia, Karma's still insane. It'll just affect the play rates of stuff that really abuse this type of stuff. So we already talked about Boom Crew. Brood Awakening, this is super interesting. They actually changed this in the beta. It was like, it wasn't really played like that much when it was 6 mana, and now they're reverting it. They changed it to 5 mana and it became really playable, and now it's like a staple, and now they're reverting it back to 6. So this is actually a pretty huge hit to it's interesting that they say we're reverting this change, Brood Awakening. It's interesting that they say this is hitting Crowd Favorite and Frenzied Skitterer, but oh, I see. Never mind. Let me read this really quick. So reverting a change we made to Brood Awakening during beta, where we wanted to buff Spider decks in the wake of Nerf's Mark of the Isles, Crowd Favorite, and Frenzied Skitterer. In the end, this change overly pushed the raw efficiency of it to the extent that it's become overly potent as a defensive tool in control decks or kill your own units combo decks. Agreed, very much agreed. Now that people have played this a lot, it'll be interesting to see if they will continue playing it. I mean, Karina is pretty much an established archetype. Karina I don't think existed before this buff during the beta, so now that that's an established archetype, I would assume that it would still make the cut, but it'll definitely put you in some more awkward spots, because you can't, like, on turn 3, it's your whole turn. You don't bank another spell mana for potentially like having a Whale or Brood next turn. So now it really changes a lot of the turns, like the progression of the game for a lot of those decks that really abuse this card. So it'll be interesting to see. This is a pretty massive hit to Karina, I feel like. Those early turns are really where, if you have an awkward hand, you're really looking to stabilize with this card, and making it cost 1 more mana can really, really punish you. So I would say this is a pretty big nerf. So we'll see how the play rates shake out, but this is pretty impactful, I feel like. This is interesting. I assume this is another one of those buffs where they're just like, we want to see the play rate of this card improve. And we see that they're giving the Longtooth 1 more attack, or 1 more health, which is interesting. Which makes sense because, yeah, this was just Vile Feasted away, and now it has to be answered with like a Mystic Shot. This could be Static Shivved away as well. Or, yeah, Static Shiv, and, or sorry, Static Shock. I always say that. Because of the item in League of Legends, but now this can't be static shocked and Vile Feasted away. So it should potentially have a little bit more sticking power. And I mean, I don't think this is like an insane buff by any means, but it's definitely relevant and could potentially push Fizz turbo level up stuff into more viability. And if maybe this pushes Fizz into the like right over the edge of like being really, really annoying, because that card is, if it finds a home that can really support it and really abuse it, that card is gonna be really, really annoying. And I guess they want to kind of push the play rates of that stuff up. And I don't know, later in the article we'll look at the watch list. They put Pilfered Goods and the whole Yoink package Klepto stuff on the watch list, but if there's a metagame where Fizz and Klepto are like tier 1 potentially, or like solid tier 2, the latter is going to be really unfun for a lot of people. So yeah, this kind of concerns me, but yeah, we'll see how it goes. And Monkey Idol still this is unplayable. This is such a terrible card. I mean, even getting this is just so unimpactful, man. Getting one more monkey should make the effect more meaningful and create more interesting and satisfying decisions around when to play it. This card is not played. I mean, maybe there's a world where this could be played, but right now it's like, if you like maybe had a card that got rid of all keywords or something, but didn't get rid of the effects, like, and then maybe you could like do some sort of weird, crazy shenanigans with it. But this card is very bad. Anyone who's playtested with this could almost certainly attest to that. Slotbot getting +1/+1 is really interesting. I don't know if this card is even really playable, even with +1/+1. It's a 3 mana 1/4, which is interesting, but the effect is so slow. Maybe in some sort of really turbo-y, Twisted Fate archetype, but this card is like has very niche use and fits into very specific archetypes where you're drawing a lot of cards, and most likely fits into something only that like TF would be in, and like maybe like a Fizz TF deck where it's like you're drawing a ton of cards, you're playing spells, you're buffing stuff up. The Slotbot could really pop off, but yeah, I think this card is still like mediocre. So now we can move on to the watch list here. So we have Unyielding Spirit is there. This card offers some unique challenges and adjusting. Yeah, numbers change pretty much exactly like this. It'll pretty much push the card out of playability range, and I think this card potentially, it kind of bottlenecks to like card design. So this like might, I don't know, it makes the game kind of unfun for people that are like getting into the game that don't know how to play around it and stuff. And it makes, as evidenced by like the Jam Fest match between like BBG and whoever it was, with the kind of everyone had a bunch of unyielding stuff on the board. It makes for like interesting play decisions, but does it really make for that interesting of gameplay? I don't think this card really does that. So they might want to, I don't know, they'll have to look into that, I guess, potentially. Obviously, we talked about the Yoink package. It's getting power level super high. I mean, drawing a ton of cards from Pilfered Goods is pretty insane. And yeah, Creed stole the perfect card situations, which happens quite often. It's pretty insane. It makes sense that this is on the watch list. It's a card that's super polarizing. It makes it super fun for one person and super unfun for another person. So does that make for a great game experience? I mean, I don't know. And we talked about this. Karma Ezreal Yeah, this makes sense. We've adjusted Karma in this patch, and Ezreal's a drop in win rate since the release. That makes sense. But they've adjusted Burn, so this might make Ezreal come up on the rise. So we'll see if Ezreal Karma can kind of pull out a win rate again. But with the Karma nerfs, we'll have to see. And I mean, that's pretty much it. We've got some cool stuff. We got some text clarity stuff, which will make it easier for people to play the game. Obviously, it'll most likely make it easier for people to understand the game. And then we have some new cosmetics, which are pretty cute. I mean, this board is sick. I mean, yeah, I don't know. I'll probably be picking up this board. Honestly, it's pretty sick. The card backs, that's sick too. So emotes are. That's hilarious. If this is like a sweaty emote, that's gonna be so good. And then you got the heart of the cards, Teemo. These emotes are pretty sick. That's pretty much it. I don't play enough expeditions, so I don't. I don't think I can really cover this. I just wouldn't really know where to start. Maybe I'll look into playing a little more expeditions so I can like make more sense of this stuff. But yeah, that's pretty much it for this in-depth patch notes. Yeah, if you stuck around and watched, I hope you learned something. I hope you got a sense of like what will be potentially impactful. I think pretty much everything here is like has a pretty significant degree of impact potentially. So I hope you liked the commentary. If you did, please feel free to like, comment, subscribe. I love seeing the interaction. It's been great to get interacting with a few of you. I've definitely gotten some ideas for stuff to do on the channel, and we've hit a few tiny milestones, which are super exciting. And yeah, I look forward to just watching the channel grow even more and getting to interact with even more of you viewers. And yeah, I hope you have a good rest of your day, and I will see all of you around. Bye-bye.